All right, thank you for joining us for the second day of UN 2.0 Week 2025. This is a high-level opening session on behavioral science. It's focusing on delivering impact this year is the theme of our week. So for those of you who haven't joined our behavioral science sessions before, welcome. My name is Mary McLennan. I'm the Senior Advisor on Behavioral Science to the Executive Office of the Secretary General. I also lead an initiative called the UN Behavioral Science Group, which I will come to shortly. So great to be with you all today. So before we get into our content and our panelist discussion, it'd be great to hear a little bit about all of you. Who's joining us today? Where are you from? What organization and location? It'd be great if you could put that in the chat so we can get a sense of who's with us today and how we can maybe have a conversation that relates to all of you. So we have some colleagues from UNFPA in Bangladesh. We also have some colleagues from OCHA in Ethiopia, from Jordan, UNICEF, Geneva, all over the world. This is so great to see. Yes, thank you. Keep it coming. All the different spaces from around the world. Brazil, truly global with us today, which is great to see. So hopefully you can use the chat as well as the Q&A function as we go about today to have an interactive discussion with our panelists and our discussants. Okay, so with that, why are we here today? What is UN 2.0 Week about? What kind of conversations are we having, and what's really the essence behind this? So essentially, the Secretary General has made it very clear that it's not possible to really solve the 21st century problems that we have with 20th century tools. So we need a new UN, essentially a UN 2.0. This is about a forward-thinking culture and a way to really embed necessary skills to make the UN nimble and agile and equipped for this 21st century. So they are data, digital transformation, innovation, strategic foresight, and of course, behavioral science, the topic of our sessions today. And underlying all of this is this aspect of culture. So really, how do we change the way the UN works and operates to embed behavioral science into the work that we do and to really make it more institutionalized and mainstream? So those will all be topics we'll be exploring throughout the week, but today we have a lot happening when it comes to behavioral science. So just backing up a little bit, what is behavioral science? So out of all of those areas of the quintet I just listed, this is perhaps a bit the newer one when it comes to work in areas of exploration across the UN. So just to get us all on the same page, behavioral science refers to an evidence-based understanding of how we make decisions, respond to policies, programs, and incentives. So sometimes when we think about how we design policies, programs, or really work in the UN, we might make assumptions about human behavior. We might think people will do something because it's in their best interest, or it's because what they've always done, or it's because of some theory we may have learned in school a while ago about how people act. But really, when we start to think about it, unpack, people don't always act the way we expect them to, and how can we embed that into our thinking? So with behavioral science, we reflect upon this in two ways. We think about how do we draw from psychology, sociology, anthropology, economics, and think about the context, how people make decisions. But we also test where possible to really understand what works and generate evidence. And this is some of the topic of conversation that we'll have today. So we'll dive a bit more into what behavioral science is, obviously, with our discussion, but I wanted to just sort of set us up with that for now. Okay, so behavioral science across the UN. We've been doing quite a bit over the last number of years here. Since 2019, we founded the UN Behavioral Science Group, which currently brings together over 8,000 colleagues from more than 70 entities in 150 countries. So lots of interest, demand, and need with respect to behavioral science, and encourage you to join the group if you haven't done so already. And we'll put some of those links in the chat for you as possible. Okay, and just last thing here before we get on to our speakers for today. So for 7 years now, we've hosted UN Behavioral Science Week. This is from this year's Behavioral Science Week. We brought together 46 UN entities just in April this year. So if you want to know more about behavioral science outside of today, which is just one day, I encourage you to check out the links which are in the chat and to explore further. Okay, so with that, on to our speakers for today. So I'm very fortunate to have with us a spectrum of speakers to reflect upon behavior, evaluation, and behavioral science in the ways that I just mentioned. So we'll start with Under-Secretary-General for Operational Support, USG Atul Khare, and then we'll go over to Executive Director Michelle Gyles-McDonnough from UNITAR, the UN Institute for Training and Research. And then we'll have more of a panel discussion with Hovig, who's the head of innovation service at UNHCR, and then two colleagues who lead behavioral science initiatives as well in their organizations, Zaina Afif at the World Bank and their Embed team, as well as James Walsh from the agency Fund. event. And of course, I'll be moderating today's discussion. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for today. So we're very fortunate to have with us USG Atul Khare, who I've heard speak a few times about behavioral science and really thought his remarks were quite insightful. So he's recently co-chaired the Secretary General's Management Reform Review, aimed at improving mandate delivery and advancing transparency. So really well placed to talk to us about how behavioral science can relate to the work and the internal workings of the UN. He's previously served as the Assistant Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations and also as Special Representative for the Secretary General in Timor-Leste. And then prior to this, he's held senior diplomatic roles within the Indian Foreign Service, including in London and New York and other several key international missions. So with that, over to you, USG Khare.
Thank you, Mary. A very good evening, good afternoon to colleagues joining from afar. I see there are close to 1,000 colleagues who have joined, and a very good morning to colleagues who are joining from the Americas region. It's a true privilege to be here today at this high-level panel on behavioral science during the UN 2.0 week. I welcome this opportunity to speak on a topic that holds great potential for transforming the way in which we advance the UN's mandate and how we do our work. Since the release of the Secretary General's guidance note on behavioral science, which was just mentioned by our colleague Mary, we have witnessed behavioral science playing a critical role in advancing the UN's mission and furthering the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a powerful tool that, using evidence-based methods, again, as explained by Mary, helps us understand human behavior and address the complex challenges we face. As part of this ongoing effort, I am very proud to reaffirm that the Department of Operational Support is deeply committed to applying behavioral science principles. Specifically, we are focused on reducing administrative burdens, designing environments that enable better decision-making, and enhancing productivity across all our functions. One of the primary areas where behavioral science is a priority for us is process simplification, which affects all of us. This is a core thematic priority outlined in the DOS planning guidance, which emphasizes the importance of simplifying and improving processes across various functions, whether it's advisory support, procurement, supply chain, uniformed capabilities support, partnerships, or crisis response. By improving these processes, we strengthen our ability to support our clients and partners more effectively and efficiently. Another key area within DOS where we have been exploring behavioral science is human resources. The HR space provides numerous opportunities to apply behavioral science principles, from how we attract, recruit, and retain talent to how we design onboarding processes that foster greater employee engagement, to how we serve our personnel after they have been onboarded. Insights from behavioral science help us understand how incentive structures, entitlements, and workplace cultures influence motivation and productivity. These insights can guide us in creating a fair, transparent performance management system that encourages collaboration and promotes well-being across teams. My own office in DOS has collaborated with the University College of London, who conducted pro bono research, so a big thank you to them, over the past 3 years to apply behavioral science approaches to improve compliance with mandatory administrative tasks, streamline recruitment processes, and enhance the rostering system. These efforts have helped us address behavioral barriers while also enhancing motivation and efficiency. The outcomes of the research have provided us with valuable insights that are now shaping not only our HR processes, but also informing the broader work that we do across the department. So moving forward, what are we going to do? We will continue to explore and apply behavioral science in a way that remains human-centered and client-focused. We understand that behavioral science, again, as Mary explained, is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather a flexible, adaptive tool using evidence gathered through testing approaches that can guide our efforts to be more responsive to the diverse needs of our global operations and clients. So I will invite all of us to continue exploring the applications of behavioral science within our own entities. I will also encourage all of us to get involved with the UN Behavioral Science Group and the UN Innovation Network. Finally, let me express my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion. I would like to thank the organizers and participants for their commitment to advancing the application of behavioral science within the UN system. Through collaboration, knowledge sharing, and continuous learning, we can harness the power of behavioral science to achieve the SDGs and indeed the mandate of our organization. Uh, since I spoke about continuous learning and, of course, about collaboration and knowledge sharing, so let me share with you a book which you might find interesting because we refer to sociology, psychology, and so on, but there is also the impact of biology on our behaviors. I speak as a person who trained as in the medical field as a doctor. The book is called Behave. It is a book by Robert Sapolsky. I'm not promoting the book, so please try and read it if you have the time. It gives you a sense of how our atavistic genes even influence our behavior in various situations. So with that, back to you, Mary.
Great. Thank you very much for those remarks. There's lots of likes and claps and hearts in the chat. Really great way of thinking about how we can apply behavioral science in terms of streamlining processes in the UN and reducing administrative burden, but also reflecting on human resources too. And really kind of great. Thank you for the shout out to the behavioral science group as well. Maybe I'll just pick up on one last thing that you mentioned there at the end about behavior and biology, given your background and context and what you're doing now. Maybe just if you want to expand a little bit on that and how we can reflect upon biology and behavior in our genes. I think that could be a really interesting new angle. If you have anything else you wanted to add with that with respect to, how we can bring that into our work, that could be interesting.
You see, for example, given the fact that over last 10,000 years, we started essentially with the genes of being a hunter-gatherer, not necessarily with the genes of being a farmer. That came later on. And as a result, whenever we are faced with an emergency, the first crisis response which biology dictates is the release of adrenaline in the blood, and that actually does not help because it increases anxiety. So we need to deal with people to calm them down and then deal with a crisis. Because if you start dealing with a crisis from point zero, then all that happens is that everybody is highly anxious, and that does not lead to good decisions. Back to you, Mary.
That's a great point. I think there's a lot of kind of interesting conversations across the UN right now about needing to make decisions quickly and perhaps in crisis mode, and the importance of really taking a step back and reflecting upon that. Thank you for that. Okay, so there'll be more time for questions afterwards. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to put questions there, either for Yoshi Khare or other panelists, we'd appreciate that. And then also, yes, please continue with your reactions. This is great to understand, parts of the conversations you're more interested in and where we can take the conversation. Okay, so next over to our second speaker, Executive Director Gyles-McDonnough from UNITAR. She was previously the Director of Sustainable Development Unit in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, supporting the implementation of just a little thing, the 2030 agenda, nothing too major there. I'm just joking. For those of you who are not familiar with the UN, it's in the SDG 2030 agenda. It's a very important initiative. She's held senior leadership roles, including the UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Representative in Barbados and Eastern Caribbean, as well as other countries, and has extensive experience supporting sustainable development governance, as well as international cooperation. So with that, over to you, Executive Director.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Atul, USG Khare, for framing and opening the session as you have. It's remarkable that this is a 7-year journey ongoing, and that's very exciting in and of itself. I'm very pleased as well to join USG Khare and all the other speakers and panelists that will come following in UN 2.0 week, and to really kind of discuss why behavioral science matters for sustainable development, and therefore for the role that UNITAR plays in helping to advance sustainable development. You know, Mary, you've set up what behavioral science is. And from where we sit at UNITAR, behavioral science can really help us in achieving stronger results and impact, because most of the global challenges that we face, whether they're ending poverty and inequality, they're halting climate change and coping with its profound and varied impacts, or is to achieve health and well-being, or the rest of the sustainable development goals, resolving these challenges is deeply tied to human behavior. And so understanding how people think, how they decide, act, and the psychological, social, and cultural factors, as you said, Mary, that shape human behavior really allows us to define more effective, more scalable, and more equitable policies and programs, and therefore improve our outcomes. At UNITAR, our mission and our aim is really to empower leaders and communities to drive change. And therefore, we have put behavioral science at the core of our work. We have seen, as we engage with the thousands of learners around the world, how harnessing the power of behavioral science in our training programs can make us better understand the drivers and the barriers to sustainable action, the intentions that need to be influenced, and the behaviors that need to be reinforced. This makes implementation and sustainable outcomes more likely. So through the whole training cycle, from design to implementation and evaluation, at UNITAR, we conduct formative research and apply a behavioral science approach. What that means, we explore the cognitive biases and the psychological behaviors that shape how individuals behave and form opinions and their beliefs and attitudes, in order to understand why people may choose to engage in harmful and unsustainable practices despite knowing what the consequences are. And then second, to examine that gap between intention and action, to try and understand the discrepancy between what people intend to do and what they actually do. Our experiential learning solutions use interactive methods such as simulations. We use AI-enhanced scenarios and real-life case studies to foster active learning and the behavioral shifts that need to accompany that. This fall, for example, we will launch our toolkit on assessing attitudinal behavioral changes, which is a step-by-step guide offering methodologies, assessment tools, and insights on using emerging technologies to monitor and evaluate behavioral change in public health domains, for example. And then if you allow me to share just a few more examples of our work, we have quite a comprehensive program in road safety. Human behavior plays a role in 90% of road traffic crashes. And you'll know we had set 2020 as the day to achieve SDG target 3.6, very achievable. And we missed it, probably for some of these reasons. Understanding the influence of behavior in road safety is crucial for designing effective safety strategies and interventions. And so to support member states, UNITAR developed this comprehensive training toolkit for government officials and practitioners on how to use a social norms approach in designing educational programs to reduce high-risk behaviors, such as distracted driving, speeding, failure to use helmets and seatbelts, and driving under the influence of alcohol. And over the past 5 years, 10,000 plus beneficiaries, mainly from governments at the national and the local levels from across 86 countries, have used this toolkit to help them to design effective social norms campaigns to improve road safety in their countries. For disaster preparedness and emergency management, another example of our work is with airport authorities. Airports are critical gateways for global connectivity, emergency response, and humanitarian aid. Recognizing this, UNITAR has developed a dedicated training program to strengthen the capacity of airport leaders and managers to respond effectively to crises and emergencies. Behavioral science and social AI are key pillars of this program. Social AI, which can help interpret emotional states such as confusion and stress in complex environments like, can help us interpret these in complex environments like airports. And we've trained over 100 airport managers and civil aviation authorities from 23 countries with a special emphasis on SIDS. As many of you know, the UN Satellite Center, UNISAT, is a part of UNITAR. And that also helps us to harness behavioral science insights to bridge the gap between technical knowledge and sustainable institutional practices that promote disaster preparedness. So through needs assessment, stakeholder consultation, and with the support of Norway, who's a major partner, the UNISAT projects across Asia Pacific and Africa have tackled the behavioral barriers to integrating disaster risk reduction in policy and decision making. And just another quick example, I'm just giving you a surface of all of these, is in combating financial crime, working in one of the countries in Latin America, where through behavioral, using behavioral science, through this lens, we try to build technical competencies and to strengthen decision-making and judgment, creating a competency framework to improve suspicious transaction reporting by over 20,000 compliance officials, and demonstrating how understanding human behavior can drive the change that the country is looking for in respect of financial crimes. And so in closing, just giving those few examples, just to say, behavioral science, as USG Khare said, it helps us to manage organizations much more effectively, to design better public policies that are human-centered and context-specific, and also to empower leaders and communities to drive change and positive impact. So it's been a huge part of our work, and certainly will remain central going forward. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much for that, Executive Director. Lots of, again, hearts and likes and claps and thumbs up. Thank you for that. Really interesting about the drivers and the barriers and thinking about how we can have impact. I think this is really the core and the essence of behavioral science, the way you spoke about it. And I love that you mentioned the intention-action gap. I think that's just so core and fundamental to a lot of the work that we do here and the essence behind behavioral science, and the examples of road safety, disaster preparedness, financial crime. It'd be great. Maybe we can share some of these resources with colleagues as well, because I think that's really, especially the toolkits, this is another space to maybe increase your 10,000 people is a lot, but maybe we can increase that even further. More use of the road safety toolkit, which is the core. It's a really interesting space for behavioral science, and great that you and colleagues, Estrella and others, have worked on that. So we have some questions coming through in the chat, but maybe one thing just to reflect upon your role as Executive Director, working with different countries and governments around the world and engaging with them. What role do you think behavioral science might have to play in how we work together with others and form partnerships either within the UN or outside? Are there ways you think about human behavior and kind of the work you do from your kind of standpoint? That would be interesting to hear some of your thoughts and reflections on that overall.
Well, I mean, as I said, it's core to the work, essential, because actually advancing development is about change. And as I started, many of those global challenges are intimately about human behavior. And so how we shift really patterns that are almost feel like they're set in stone sometimes to make radical transformative shifts, which is what we need to achieve many of the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't think it's really possible to do that without a tool like behavioral science to really take account of context, culture, and behavior within that that context to be able to do what we need to do. And really, I think as we aim for scale in what we're doing and acceleration, I think when we look at some of these missing elements of 2.0 foresight and behavioral science, in a way, it explains part of, why we probably still are at 7% achievement of these goals. There are many other contributing factors, but I think by taking on these approaches, and as the Secretary General says, we can't solve old, you can't solve new problems with old tools. This will help us to make that push in this last mile that we really need to.
Great, thanks for that. I think there's some comments coming in about the 2030 agenda, so I'm glad that you referenced that and really kind of brought that back into the fold too. Well, thank you so much, Executive Director. It's great to have you with us in your remarks. Some more questions are coming through now, so we'll maybe have some discussion at the end if you can stick around. But thank you so much for sharing those remarks.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So next, over to our next few speakers here. So we'll be hearing from, as I mentioned, Hovig, who's the head of innovation service at UNHCR. He has extensive field experience in complex humanitarian settings, including leadership roles in Iraq and focusing on emergency coordination operation. So there's been some interesting work within his team applying behavioral science. So I turn it over to you, Hovig, for some reflections on how we can use behavioral science and evidence to improve the work of the UN.
Thank you, Mary, and it's great to be with all of you today. Maybe just before I speak about behavioral science, I think there's two elements for us in innovation that make maybe our work more impactful, and the use of thematics like behavioral science is easier for us to use these methodologies. And these two fundamental pillars, one is working very closely with refugee communities. So the work that we do with refugee-led organizations, helping them and giving them the resources to innovate, has been crucial for us to get that very close relationship with the people we serve. And I'll give some insights on how now we're using behavioral science to get better at working with these communities. So that is fundamental, the closest to the people we serve, and putting resources with them for them to innovate. The second pillar is the digital inclusion of the communities, refugee and displaced communities. And for years, we've been investing on connectivity all the way to improving channels of communication with refugees and displaced populations. So also that digital inclusion and improvement of channels of communication is helping us work very closely with them. Without that closeness to communities, I think none of our work would be as impactful. Now, in terms of the use of behavioral science, there are many ways we're using behavioral science, and I'll focus on more the refugee-facing examples. So the first area where we're exploring behavioral science is to strengthen UNHCR's protection outcomes. Behavioral science is helping us understand the attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors of host communities, which is key to ensure refugee protection and inclusion. And we did something that is not that usual, but we have a project called Beyond Full Time, which our sports advocacy team is leading, and is looking at actually using behavioral science to explore how football fans in Germany, Spain, and the UK perceive refugees. And through this project, we identified that there is a movable middle in the middle in terms of fans who are empathetics, who value solidarity, but were not very engaged with refugee causes. So this kind of insight helped us better target these populations for them to engage better with the topic of refugees and be supportive. The second maybe area where we're exploring is evidence-informed decision-making in what we call protection programming. And we have a project in Brazil where through the use of behavioral diagnostics, we kind of unpacked why asylum seekers in Brazil were not accessing the free legal aid that UNHCR was providing. And the behavioral diagnostics showed barriers like low awareness, mistrust, and complex procedures that we had, which helped us better improve first our messaging to those communities, also make our services more accessible. So this is, the link of the use of behavioral science directly to get insights and improve the services we're providing to asylum seekers. And maybe the third area where we're also investing in is combining data modeling with behavioral science to enhance our ability to anticipate future needs and design proactive solutions. And this is in Europe, where our Europe Bureau is using agent-based modeling to simulate how Ukrainian refugees might decide whether to return home after temporary protection ends. And for those of you who are familiar with displacement, return is one very important part of the solution. And the better we are prepared for the return of refugees, the more sustainable the returns are. So we're using, the model is considering behavioral drivers such as legal status, economic opportunities, safety perceptions, and family ties to better understand the sentiments of the Ukrainian population and help with the return. Voila, these are 3 areas where we are investing. Again, thanks for the time. I yield back.
Great, thank you for that, Hovig. It's a really nice tour of ways we can apply behavioral science in humanitarian in different settings. This is exactly a question that came in the chat before you came here, so you've answered it brilliantly with these examples about football fans. I think we'll be hearing about that for another side event taking place during the UN 2.0 week as well. And then really interesting example with asylum seekers too. It's a really kind of core space in which we can think about burdens administratively and how we can apply behavioral science. And yeah, the really cool agent-based modeling, thinking about, maybe putting 2 or 3 areas of the quintet together and behavioral science along with data and digital and reflect upon, how we can do this too. So I know there's potentially some publications. We can maybe share those with colleagues too. I know Rebecca, one of your members of your team, is here with us today, so maybe we can reflect upon that. So thank you for that, Hovig. So maybe we'll come back for lots of questions coming in at the end, but maybe we'll go next to our next panelist. Zeina Afif, who's a senior social scientist, but also leading a large part of the work at Embed, the World Bank's behavioral science team. She has significant experience. I think she's been around since the very early days of the team over 10 years ago, working across behavioral science in areas like financial inclusion, employment, as well as social cohesion. So Zeina, over to you for some reflections on how we can apply behavioral science and evidence to improve the work of the UN.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary. And it's a great pleasure to be all of you with these and with the distinguished speakers. For the past 10 years at the World Bank, we have been integrating behavioral science into operations, working with more than 150 projects across the globe, teaming up with thematic experts and governments to address behavioral barriers in their projects. And we've worked with projects such as how do you improve early warning systems during hurricanes in Haiti, to encouraging rural women to participate in productive activities, to understanding better why social norms are preventing women in certain countries in joining the labor market. We've used behavioral science to better understand also why well-designed projects are not leading to the intended results. And this is where, perspective taking and applying the behavioral lens becomes valuable, because it provides more information to policy designers and implementers on why certain things are not working. And what we've seen in our work at the World Bank, we've had the greatest impact, not when we are using it to improve communication or doing nudges, but to rethink how systems are designed, especially when the problem is not just what people know, but what they can or want to do in practice and how easy it is for them to do that. This means integrating behavioral science into upstream policy design, addressing implementation bottlenecks, but also system-level changes, and looking things at a policy level versus just at a small activity within the project. So this is an area where we are very much interested in working in and expanding our work and thinking, are we designing policies that reflect the lived lives of the lived realities of the people they're meant to serve? And this is where, being able to move towards even more rigorous and evidence is important, and being able to test and apply methods such as randomized controlled trial, A/B testing, to be able to see if these solutions actually are working. And there are also other methods which would be great if we, as agencies that work across multiple countries and multiple regions within countries, move towards things such as mega studies, which are large-scale experiments that test multiple interventions across shared outcome. And they can be quite powerful, allowing us to compare not just whether something works, but which approach works best, and revealing interesting insights. One of the best example is the mega study conducted by Professor Katie Milkman and colleagues from University of Pennsylvania, where they tested with 60,000 participants in a US gym chain the 54 different behavioral nudges to see which one increases gym attendance. These are the kind of mega studies that we are able to do in entities such as the UN entities, the World Bank. We do have this level of scale that allows us to have do more rigorous and comparative behavioral interventions. I also want to mention also multinational behavioral experiments where you can actually test similar interventions or addressing similar issue across multiple countries. We've been able to do that with the support of donors such as CDEV and Gates Foundation, as well as the Alliance for Advancing Health. We're able to address issues such as COVID vaccine hesitancy, as well as addressing nutrition issues and increased clean energy access. So just to kind of conclude is that we have a great opportunity here to be able to move away from pilot to portfolio, to learn across size and scale, and to embed behavioral thinking, not just in communication, but how policies, services, and design delivery systems are designed. And as AI and digital systems grow and become more powerful, we're also able to leverage that to even provide a better solution. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you for that, Zaina, reflecting upon all the work that you've done in the World Bank over the number of years, thinking about not just going communications, but going beyond that, how we can do systems, think about the policy level, also reflecting upon how we evaluate, not just randomized control trials. You know, we've talked about A/B testing or online experiments, going to randomized control trials through to mega studies and multi-country studies to really think about what works in different countries and contexts. So lots here to explore and to think about in the future. So you also mentioned a bit about the digital side of things and maybe where we're heading. So with that, I might turn it over to our next speaker, who's joined us, James Walsh. As I mentioned, he leads behavioral science in the Agency Fund, which focuses on scaling social innovation and unlocking human potential, which he'll explain a bit more about. He's been a research analyst with the World Bank's team, but he's also been a researcher at leading institutions like Harvard University and Oxford as well. So with that, James, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction, and it's great to be speaking with so many fantastic co-panelists. As Mary said, my name is James. I work with a group called the Agency Fund, and we're fairly new. We've been around for about 3 years now, and essentially what we are is we are a social impact accelerator. We are looking for the world's most innovative nonprofits, organizations that are dedicated to expanding human agency, whether that's through supporting parents and their caretaking of young children, whether it's supporting teenagers with their mental health, supporting people with livelihoods to get out of poverty, or for example, mums going through pregnancy. And so the way we work is that we've invested in about 100 or 150 nonprofits, and we're looking to kind of support those organizations get to the very cutting edge. And at the core of this work is behavioral science, and this is an area that, as Mary mentioned, I've been working in for a long time, and many of the team have been working in for a very long time. And so I wanted to just reflect on the kind of, in the work that we do, what are some ways in which behavioral science can drive more effective decision making, can drive innovation and cost effectiveness, and ultimately improve the quality of programming. And I'll share a couple of ways, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the examples from some of the organizations we're working with. So I think one thing in which behavioral science can really add in terms of decision making, especially for the decision making of senior leaders, of people who are working from one country to another or managing large programs, is this tools around user research. So this is often qualitative analysis. Sometimes it's mixed with quantitative analysis as well, and it's really focused on understanding the fundamental psychological needs of users. So many of the, like as anybody in these programming on the call will know, people have these deep needs, to belong, to have a sense of control over their lives, for a sense of integrity and esteem, to sense of purpose in their lives. And this operates even in contexts of acute disadvantage, of acute challenge. And so what we often do with our partners is conduct the kind of deep research to understand the motives, the needs, and the lived experiences of the people that are working in our programs. One group in particular that we've found this to be really effective with is a pioneering organization in India called Rocket Learning, who are delivering guidance by WhatsApp to daycare workers, Anganwadi workers across the country, with 350,000 daycare workers. And their work on personas, on user research, is enabling them to understand who are the daycare workers, for example, who've kind of come into this program really motivated, with excellent role models, and kind of really know where they want to go in terms of developing their capabilities as early childhood educators. But at the same time, recognize, like, being able to identify those who've actually kind of come in to the programming kind of like without agency, and that will enable them to target their supports in a really psychologically informed way. So user research, I think, has been a really critical way of enabling strategic decision making, especially for people who maybe don't spend their day to day on the ground. The second way in which cost effectiveness has been, in which behavioral science has been truly catalytic, is through the cost effectiveness of the interventions that it has brought about. As many people know, behavioral science really came out of this kind of empirical revolution that Mary and Zaina were talking about, where randomized trials are starting to being tested to kind of test different ideas. And what we found is that some of the most effective, cost-effective interventions in the world are derived by these behavioral science principles. And so one of the groups that we work with, who I'm particularly excited about, is a group called Shamiri. They're a mental health organization that support young people in secondary schools, and they're able to deliver mental health supports that are, among the most groundbreaking in the world. A lot of the most important innovations in mental health are coming from the continent of Africa, and Shamiri are kind of at the forefront of that. And they've been able to scale to about 100,000 over the course of 2-3 years, to about 100,000 students, delivering light touch mental health support in an incredibly cost-effective way. So that's another thing that behavioral science can offer at a time when budgets are strapped and these large-scale programs are often really under pressure. Behavioral science offers ways to deliver them and deliver impact, often in innovative ways. A third part that I think is really important about behavioral science is this idea of testing and learning. And so, Zaina mentioned using A/B tests. A/B tests have turned out to be a crucial and critical way for behavioral science to achieve the impact that it does. Because although we can bring excellent ideas to the table in program design, we don't always know whether they'll work. And one of the things that I've been most excited to see is as like many of these very innovative nonprofits are starting to roll out programs at scale, they've been able to use principles of behavioral science to essentially A/B test how can they help their users, help the people that they're trying to serve, engage with their product in more effective and meaningful ways. And so, just to give one example, there's a group that we work called Nora Health, probably like a pioneering global health organization, focused in many ways supporting moms and their families and through the childbirth process. But when they provided their WhatsApp, they were kind of providing WhatsApp services to their users, and many times they were struggling to get people to register and provide consent to opt in. And so by being able to use behavioral science principles to kind of make the experience more personable, by A/B testing it to see which ones are more effective, they were able to expand the access of their program by 2 or 3-fold, simply by just doing these small behaviorally informed new approaches. So these are some of the ways in which behavioral science is being leveraged to drive cost-effective social impact and to improve the world. And it's really exciting to see organizations within the UN, entities within the UN, applying them across the world. I'm delighted to be here. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that, James. Some perspective outside of the UN and how we can reflect upon this in the NGOs and the nonprofit space. Lots of claps and hearts and likes for your comments there. Yeah, really interesting about you research. I mean, it's not research for the sake of research. It's really understanding the context. And oftentimes, you know, we've developed one of the resources is a guide we developed in the UN with UN colleagues, and it's not a new guide. It basically takes existing things. We call it a diagnostic. So really to kind of reflect upon, you know, what's happening here and really understanding people. In the different contexts in which the UN works. And I really like the comments about, you know, it's not just about behavior, it's about cost effectiveness and evaluation and how we can do this overall. Okay, so with that, maybe get to some of the questions that we have in the Q&A. If all of our speakers like to turn their cameras on, we have some time to answer a few of them. I'll try to group some of them together as we can. I see some of the colleagues have already answered a few of them. So it's great that you're still with us, Executive Director, because we did have a comment, if you're still there, about the 2030 agenda and the SDGs and localization. So maybe we can go to that a little. How do we localize behavioral science strategies? What could that mean? This is for all. Maybe I'll group a couple of the questions together. So it's a bit around that, and then also around what kind of skills do we need to be doing behavioral science? James talked about research, Zaina talked about these big studies. So how do we localize this? How do we take these big agendas of UN 2.0 and bring it meaningfully on the ground? And then maybe what kind of skills do we need, both working in programs, other humanitarian settings or operational settings in the UN? How do we do this meaningfully, and maybe how do we do that? So I'll turn it over maybe to Executive Director first, given that the 2030 agenda was mentioned, but then turn over to other colleagues as well.
Thank you, Mary. And also just because I'm going to have to jump off to a member state event shortly. But in terms of localizing these behavioral science strategies, I think this is fundamental. One of the ways we do it through UNITAR is, you know, we're fortunate to have, I think, in the UN system, one of the largest kind of local level platforms that exists, which is this network of CFAL centers that we have. These are partnerships we have with local authorities and with universities. We have them in 33 countries around the world. And basically by entering through this collaboration, really kind of step into their own networks and work that they do at the local level with partners. And so in particular, for example, in the area of road safety, we work with one of our academic partners, York University in Canada, to do a lot of this behavioral science analysis. And just as Zaina was saying, is to make sure that it informs the design of the training programs that we deploy, that it takes account of all of these parameters, how human behavior shifts and looking at the intention and action gap. And it comes back all the way through to the evaluation and how do we help these partners at the local level to really measure and understand what is happening on behavior change. So, I mean, it comes out fundamentally. I think we all have to do some of the elements that I pointed to and that Zaina pointed to, you know, whether it's systems, policies, evaluation, we have to do it at all levels from national down to the local. And really, like I say, we enter it through our network. And for example, one of the things since I've joined UNITAR in these last 3.5 months is to really connect up, our colleagues working through these CFAL centers with the local 2030 network, because one of the huge challenges we saw in terms of implementation of the SDGs, we know we'll never get it done without going local, which is really where rubber hits the road. And so how do we strengthen our capabilities across the UN system to act subnationally in what we know is really a nation state-based organization is a fundamental challenge that we have to crack. I'll leave it there. There are many other points of your question, but we have other colleagues also can jump in on that in the interest of time.
Thank you so much for those remarks. It's really, really insightful to think about how we take these big agendas and reflect upon them locally. And nice examples there, working with partners, both Global North and Global South. So thank you for that. Okay, other panelists, USG Khare, if you're still here, do you have any thoughts on this, on how we can take these big agendas? How do we make the UN more effective? If you're still here, are you still here, USG Khare? Maybe not. You had to drop off. That's all right. Well, thank you, Executive Director. Maybe to other panelists, do you have thoughts on this point about localization, as well as what kind of skills and capabilities we might need to be doing this? We talked, Executive Director spoke about some of the universities, partnerships. So, how do you do this practically, and what kind of skills might be needed to do this on the ground? Yes, please, Hovig, please.
Thanks, Mary. As I mentioned earlier, I think our closeness to the communities we serve is essential. Over the past 3 years, we invested heavily in working directly with refugee organizations, and our work with them has been revolutionary in the sense that we started channeling a considerable amount of funding. So we give up to $45,000 of funding to very local organizations, some of whom don't even have a bank account, work very closely with them on their capacities. And so it's not just implementing projects that they design, but also helping them become fully fledged organizations that can fly on their own. And so by investing in those organizations, uplifting them, then using methodologies such as behavioral science becomes more potent because you are working with the clients. We're not a fan of, we're more fans of innovating with as opposed to innovating for. Now, we do a lot of the innovating for through our teams, but we're big fans of innovating with communities. And I think if we create space for those local organizations to strive, to ensure that they are digitally included, we as the world is going more digital, but in the last mile, many who are our clients are not yet connected. There are not enough investments. And we're working with the likes of World Bank to bring those investments of infrastructure so that those communities have access to the digital. It doesn't help us going digital and use methodologies like behavioral science if the people we serve are not connected, are not part of the global digital environment. So I think that those investments require a lot of resources and time and patience, and taking a lot of risks. And if we do that, then working with these communities and using what behavioral science provides as insight only can make things better. But without those investments, we risk being very siloed and maybe detached from those who we are all paid to serve. Over to you.
Great, thank you for that, Hovig. Very, very interesting insights there, and also the bit around. I'll turn over to, we don't have a ton of time left. Maybe over to Zaina and James. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on this? I was going to launch into another conversation, but I won't do that. Zaina and James, do you have some thoughts on this?
Sure. So I think that what has worked for us with behavioral science is the fact that it's all about the local setting, the context, and co-creating, co-working with the local groups, whether it is teaming up with the local universities, local consultants, but also going to the field and talking directly to the beneficiaries who we are designing these solutions for. The goal is not, again, like I said, design for, but design with. I think we want to, even with behavioral science, we want to be able to use behavioral science to design with the communities some of the solutions we are proposing for them. I think that's very important, and that's just good development not just behavioral science, that's just good development. I wanted to just quickly touch on the skills because this came up a few times over the questions. Behavioral science is very accessible. I think we all need to have a certain level of understanding behavioral science, the same way we all had to learn communication, we all had to learn IT. The same thing with behavioral science. There's a certain level of behavioral science that will help everybody in their day-to-day work, in their lives, and I think that's something that's quite accessible. I've shared, for those interested in the World Bank course, I've shared in the chat the link to our introductory course. We will have advanced courses launched later this year. But there are some great other resources available. It's really, there's great books for those who work. You talked about the cost of building infrastructure. There's a book called How Big Things Get Done. I thought it was a great way to talk about behavioral science and project management. So there's really some great resources there. Whichever topic you're interested in, there's something in behavioral science, project management, behavioral science, conflict and behavioral science. So there's a book out there for anybody interested in expanding their learning and skill set. And there are some great resources such as the toolkit already mentioned and other resources. Thank you, Mary.
Great, thanks for that, Zaina. And James, over to you for the last few words here.
Thanks. Yeah, to both Hovig's and Zaina's comments really resonate. I think Zaina's point that this is like there's behavioral science for everybody is I think a really important message to leave with this. There are like so many tools, and it can really help your professional work and also your personal life. So I love that message. I also love the idea of co-designing with. And I think the final thing I would say is maybe just to go back to this idea of user research. I think when we're thinking about localizing innovation or localizing development or localizing these programmatic works, sometimes we think about the only aspect of localization is simply, working with local partners to implement. But I would just encourage us to also think that localization really means about like understanding and meeting the needs of the people who are supposed to be using the programs. And so while it is absolutely crucial to work with local organizations, it's often not enough. And those organizations and we ourselves have to have the tools and the skills to actually understand the people that they're serving. And that's actually not always done, and it can be done better and better and better. And the more effectively we are at understanding the perspective and the needs and the motivations of the people that we're working for and serving, the more effective we'll be. So I think that I'll leave that like thought in terms of how we think about localization.
Great, thanks for that, James. It's a great way to sum up how we're thinking about behavioral science today across the UN and around the world, and how we reflect upon the local context and the populations we work. Okay, so thank you very much to our panelists and to our opening speakers today. It was a really interesting conversation from administrative aspects of the UN through to training and research and humanitarian settings and decade of work from the World Bank, and a lot of really interesting new stuff from the agency fund. So thank you for all of your insights and ideas. I'm just going to conclude with a few slides here, if I can. That would be great, about UN 2.0 week. So we put in the chat already some of the links to join the behavioral science group. It'd be great if we could get those again. I think we had a number of people asking for them to put in the chat, just ways to join the group. We also have a number of resources, including the Secretary General's Guidance Note on Behavioral Science, the UN Practitioner's Guide to Getting Started with Behavioral Science, in addition to the UN Behavioral Science Review. So we'll get those links for you shortly in the chat. You can also join the other communities of practice. So we currently have here so the links to join the community of practice were just shown. But also UN 2.0 week is taking place this week. So we had innovation yesterday, we have behavioral science today. So we have, after this, just in the next hour, we have Solutions Expo. So if you want to hear more examples of work going on across the UN, you can do that there. I'll just find the links for you to join the group. 1 second, I'll put them myself in the chat. Here we go. Here are all the links to join the community, just in case you would like to. So we also have tomorrow, the Data and Digital Day, high-level panel as well, taking tomorrow at 9 a.m. and it's a Solutions Expo too. And then on Thursday, we have Foresight, and concluding on Friday with Culture, that cross-cutting piece we mentioned at the start. So with that, please feel free to join the behavioral science group, and I hope to see you at one of our sessions shortly. On the next slide, you can now join, this is the link to join UN 2.0 week. So I saw some of the comments in the chat about how do we join the other sessions. If you go here, you can join the sessions. And with that, thank you very much for all your comments and thoughts and reactions. It's been a really interesting conversation, and looking forward to seeing you throughout the week and later on in our behavioral science community. Thanks so much, everyone.